We're back now with Father Frank Pavone, the founding director of Priests for Life, and we're discussing this document on Humanae Vitae, on human life, and it is so vital for us to understand this when we're talking about the civilization of life versus the civilization of death. Father, you're talking now in section 14 of this document.
Yes, the title of the section is Illicit Ways of Regulating Birth. And in the context of everything we've said, we notice that the Church is saying illicit ways of regulating birth. It's not equating regulating birth with illicit. So there are ways of planning our family. But and I want also to emphasize this, that the encyclical Humanae Vitae is not primarily a no. The document is essentially a yes. It's a resounding yes to life, to marriage, to conjugal love, to the plan of God for these realities. And so I don't want people to get the idea that the Church is just, saying no to this and no to that and no to the other thing. The only reason we say no to things is that we've already said yes to a beautiful plan of God that we can know, that we can understand, and that we have the power to live. And that plan is our way to fulfillment and happiness. Now, with that in mind, the document says this: in conformity with these landmarks in the human and Christian vision of marriage, so there's the positive, we must once again declare that the direct interruption of the generative process already begun, and above all, directly willed and procured abortion, even if for therapeutic reasons, are to be absolutely excluded as illicit means of regulating birth. You think about the term birth control. It's a very powerful term. Birth control. In other words, I'm controlling who gets born. Well, people are in existence before they get born. If you're controlling who gets born, does that mean you can kill the person before he's born? And of course, the abortion mentality says, sure, I can. Yes, I can. And that's where we see the link between contraception and abortion. And I must say, more and more people outside of the Catholic Church are recognizing this link. More and more people that I meet with who are Protestant, who are Jewish, who are atheists, are recognizing, you know what, contraception, it's a pretty bad thing. It's harming us. I was at a pro-life event recently where it was a week-long event, national event, and every night I was in a Baptist church, and we were Christians from all denominations, but a minister got up there and he started preaching. And I heard on that night more teaching about how wrong artificial contraception is than I've heard in a year in a Catholic parish.
Isn't that something?
Something's happening here.
Yes.
And
the Holy Spirit really is coming down.
The Spirit is moving lots of people.
Because the truth is the truth.
It's the truth.
Eventually come around to it,
Exactly. Yes. So the Holy Father says here, look, you can't interrupt the generative process. And abortion, of course, interrupts that. And here it's helpful to recall that there's more than one form of abortion. And a lot of times the so-called birth control pills and devices are actually causing abortions.
So they conceive and it kills the baby after it's...
Exactly. Abortion, strictly defined, is destroying the newly developing life at any point from fertilization on. The tricky thing is, we don't know exactly when fertilization begins. Now, if a woman makes an appointment at an abortion facility and she goes in and they give her the pregnancy test, okay, you're 6 weeks pregnant, 8 weeks pregnant, whatever, well, then obviously you know that a child has been conceived.
Right.
But we cannot pinpoint the moment of fertilization. If someone is taking birth control pills and devices, they need to understand this, that these drugs often work in a dual fashion. That, on the one hand, they try to prevent ovulation in the first place.
Right.
But that doesn't always work. And so they have a backup mechanism where if a fertilization does take place, and as soon as that fertilization occurs, of course, then you have a new human life, and that's scientific reality, that's not just the Church speaking, then these drugs and devices work in such a way that they make the lining of the uterus hostile to the developing life, so that this new fertilized ovum cannot implant and begin to grow and be nourished, but rather is rejected. The mother might not know the difference. Won't know the difference, in other words, between a fertilization not occurring or a fertilization occurring and then being expelled.
That's a real person.
It's a real person.
So there's a soul in that person.
Exactly.
don't think we realize. Oh, it's amazing.
And I find many people, their eyes widen and they say, "Oh my goodness, I didn't realize. You mean I might be killing my children by taking these birth control pills? I thought I was avoiding children." Well, read the fine print, and it's not necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm.
Holy Father goes on to talk about something which is a very, very big area. He says, equally to be excluded, as the teaching authority of the Church has frequently declared, is direct sterilization.
That's big time today.
It really is. And he says, whether perpetual or temporary, and whether of the man or the woman.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have done this and today regret it. Now, a lot of people, to their credit, upon repenting of the sin of being sterilized, are reversing it.
Yeah.
And more doctors are specializing in sterilization reversal.
It's amazing. The insurance will take care of sterilization, but they won't take care of a reversal a lot of times.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Yeah,
how our
right.
society
Right.
is unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, how it's just...
We are inclined in the direction of saying no to life.
Yeah, they so often, as soon as you have enough children, they say, well, better tie your tubes now. You've had enough children, and
Well,
this is something they...
The sad thing in this, too, is there's a terrible injustice. It would be bad enough. It would be bad enough if the doctor and if the legal structure of society says, as it does, you may do this, and, it's perfectly okay. But that's not the reality, as we know. The reality is that parents are approached by the medical community and practically pressured into doing this. So many people have said, "Oh, well, my doctor he presumed that that's what I would want to do."
Yeah, right.
Well, wait a minute, don't presume. And we've got to say to the medical community, wait a second, what the Church says here, the Church is giving more rights to parents here, recognizing those rights, than are actually being practiced in society. The parents are being told, "Oh, of course you want your tubes tied, right?" As if it's like a foregone conclusion.
Oh, it's
well,
the pressure.
Hold on a second.
Just like when Gwen was, she was told on our 11th child, Teresa, that she wouldn't survive the birth, and the doctors told her, your uterus, if you don't take the baby now, abort the baby, basically, you won't survive. And she said, well, if we take the baby now, will the baby live? No, it won't live. It's too young. Mm-hmm. She says, well, we just take one day at a time. We're not taking the baby. But it was due around Christmas time, so Gwen thought she was going to die. She really did, the doctor. And this was a good doctor. This wasn't an abortionist. He didn't perform abortions, but he just honestly thought that, Gwen, you're going to die. When you start labor, your uterus is going to bust before you get to the hospital. You bleed to death before. Mm-hmm. And she was convinced she was going to die. And she wrote a letter to all the children at Christmas time, because she was due around Christmas, and just saying how special their births were. Wow. And how each one was so special. And if this child survives me, just accept this child just like I accepted you. And we read that letter every year as a Christmas time, our family, sort of tradition. But here Gwen was a young mother and willing to die, and but the child was born, and that her name is Teresa, and it was amazing. Teresa was the one that, of all of our 12 children, that was really by Gwen's side all the time and was her nurse for the last month of her life, and taking care of her. But it was, and every time Gwen talked about the children, because she died of hepatitis C, which came from a blood transfusion and having cesarean births in the last 4, and a lot of times you might regret, well, why did I have those children?
Right.
And every time she talks about the children, she'd say, each one's special, and she'd do it again. She would go through it again. She wouldn't want anyone not to be there. So I think, Father, I think she's going to be a model for life.
She really is.
She's
really
had a
is.
large family, large number of grandchildren, and
right.
And she was timid and always quiet, never in front and talking. But now that we're finding her writings and her letters, and then we go back over the few talks that she used to give, they had so much meaning. But she lived it. She just lived her life.
She really did. She's a living example of what this
this is
what
all
this
about.
encyclical
And
is
she
about.
died a happy woman. She died a happy mother and a grandmother. And one of my sons said, Mom, you did a lot of great things in your life. What would you like to be known 100 years from now? She said, Joe, I don't think you really want to know. Yeah, Mom, what would you want? She said a mother and a grandmother.
Yeah.
That's all she wants to be known as a mother and a grandmother. She was just proud to be a mother and proud to be a grandmother.
Right.
So,
Right.
so Father, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
walking the walk here. And